My racist relatives pressured me and my wife to go to a family gathering just so they could set me up for murder, not realizing that the fate of their lives would rest in the palm of my hand. Have you ever had your own family try to frame you for murder at a barbecue? Yeah, that's where my story starts. And trust me, it only gets crazier from there. Let me take you back to the beginning. From the moment I started dating my beautiful wife Lauren, our families were at each other's throats. See, Lauren was practically the embodiment of the American dream. All-American family, 5-bedroom house, golden Labrador in the yard. And then there was me, a Mexican kid raised by a dirt-poor family who clawed his way up from nothing. So when she brought me home, let's just say they weren't thrilled. But Lauren meant everything to me, so I was determined to win them over. And I went all in. Years of sending expensive gifts for their nieces and nephews, baskets of flowers, paying for their streaming subscriptions, anything to show I was serious. And eventually they came around. They decided they were somewhat okay with me marrying their daughter. My family, though, that was a different story. They refused to stop calling Lauren Gringa. Every gathering was a minefield. So to avoid conflict, I started declining invitations to as many family events as possible. But then came one summer cookout at my parents' place. My mom guilt-tripped me so hard I finally caved. So for once Lauren and I actually showed up. And the second we walked in, I wanted the ground to swallow us whole. We arrived at 12:03, 3 minutes late. And immediately the dirty look started. My sisters Georgina and Camila marched right up to us. We thought a cracker like you was too good to show up to our cookout. Lauren's face crumbled. She looked like she was about to cry. I told them to back off. Harsh words. Their husbands, Pedro and Juan, just rolled their eyes like it was nothing. And if it weren't for the kids being right there, I would have lost it completely. So instead we grabbed some frozen margaritas and tried to drink our way to some kind of happiness. That's when my dad waved from his hot tub sanctuary. And what came out of his mouth? I can't even repeat all of it. He made a disgusting comment about Lauren. Something crude about us not having kids yet. I looked over at my wife and I could see it. That thing she does, where she pretends not to care. But her eyes are glassing over and she's barely holding it together. Before I could even react, Georgina chimed in. Some of us actually want to continue the family legacy, Dad. And just like that, the passive-aggressive comments started flying. One after another. How selfish we were. How we didn't care about family. I grabbed Lauren's hand. Let's go. But she squeezed back and shook her head. She was adamant about staying. She wanted to try. She wanted to bond with my family. And you know the saying, happy wife, happy life? Well, I lived by that. So we stayed. About 45 minutes later, things took a turn. Two of the kids, Georgina's oldest boy Dogo and Camila's daughter Renata, started running around the pool trying to shove people in. By this point, Lauren and I were pretty buzzed, just lounging by the sunbeds trying to stay out of the way. Then I noticed them heading toward this older white woman in her 60s. She was standing dangerously close to the pool edge. The kids grabbed at her. She stumbled, didn't fully fall in but got soaked up to her knees. She left shortly after. And my family, they burst into laughter. Did you see her ugly cracker face? Pedro cackled, nearly spilling beer onto his gut. I was disgusted. This awful gut feeling washed over me. But Lauren kept insisting she was bonding with everyone, that things were getting better. She convinced me to stay just a little longer. And then everything changed. I tried to murder my nephews and nieces. At least that's what my family wants to believe. Here's what actually happened. I was standing by the pool, chatting with someone when out of my peripheral vision, I caught 3 kids charging at me full speed. Obviously, I was their next target. So I did the only logical thing. I sidestepped. All 3 kids ran straight into the pool at full speed. Startled shrieks. A massive splash. Most of the guests laughed, including Lauren and me. It was a backfired prank. Funny, right? Not to my sisters. Georgina jumped up so fast her margarita splashed across the patio. Dogo! Dogo! She screamed, sprinting to the pool edge where her son was flailing and splashing everywhere. Camila was right behind her. Renata can't swim. Oh my God, Renata! Apparently, 2 of the kids couldn't even swim, despite wearing swimsuits. At a pool party, with water activities planned. Since I wasn't dressed for swimming, I stepped back and let others handle it. Pedro and Juan, who had been laughing moments earlier, dove into the pool fully clothed. The children were wailing dramatically, like they'd been mortally wounded, even though they'd only been in the water for seconds. And then all hell broke loose. The 4 drunk parents started screaming at everyone, especially me, for almost letting their kids drown. They were also furious because 2 of the kids had been filming the prank with their parents' iPhones, which were now sitting at the bottom of the pool. One brother-in-law tried diving for the phones, but his size and level of intoxication made that impossible. And nobody else volunteered, since my sisters were still screaming at everyone in sight. "You could have killed my son," Georgina shrieked at me, mascara streaming down her face. "You saw them coming and you just moved out of the way. What kind of monster does that?" Camila added, wrapping a towel around Renata, who was sobbing theatrically. "These are children." I felt my blood pressure spiking. "They were trying to push me into the pool," I said. "I was wearing street clothes. I had my phone in my pocket." "So what?" Pedro bellowed, his face turning purple. "It's just a phone. These are kids." I told my sisters it was their responsibility to watch their kids, not mine. If anything had happened, it would have been on them. "Maybe teach your kids not to assault adults at parties," I added. Admittedly, not helpful to an already volatile situation. "Assault?" Juan scoffed, swaying as he tried to keep his balance. "It's a pool party, and they're just having fun," Camila added, clutching her daughter. "You have no idea what it's like to raise children." "Thank God for that," Lauren muttered under her breath, just loud enough for me to hear. Harsh words kept flying back and forth. We finally decided to leave after my other brother-in-law literally face-planted while screaming at us. One had been getting increasingly in my face, jabbing his finger into my chest, when he suddenly lurched forward and smashed directly into the concrete. Blood immediately started pooling under his face. "We're done here," I said to Lauren, who was already gathering our things. "Now they're claiming I should have just let the kids push me in. Let them have their fun. Let them ruin my phone. Of course. And my dad? He never left his hot tub sanctuary during any of it. When we walked past him on the way out, he just raised his eyebrows and took another sip of beer. "See you at Christmas?" he asked with a lazy smile. "Not if they're coming," I replied, nodding toward the chaos behind us. 1 month later. First update. Turns out my nieces and nephews are actually decent swimmers. According to my parents, they use the pool regularly. The 7-year-old is still learning but loves the water. My sister just claimed they couldn't swim to make me look bad. "They've been swimming here all summer," my dad told me during a phone call, his tone completely matter-of-fact. Georgina and Camila were just being dramatic. Dogos on the swim team, for crying out loud. After we left, the party ended badly. My drunk brother-in-law who face-planted needed stitches at urgent care. Dad had to drive him since he was too wasted, which Dad was not happy about. "Had to sit in that waiting room for 3 hours, he grumbled. One kept trying to hit on the nurse while Camila was alternating between crying and yelling at him. It was a nightmare. I'm too old for this nonsense. That evening, my sisters started a nasty group text that included our parents, with their husbands adding their 2 cents. The messages were vicious, calling me and Lauren selfish child haters, saying we were the reason the family was falling apart. There were even comments about how I always thought I was better than everyone since college. Lauren and I blocked all 4 of them. Mom called me, upset about the horrible things they'd said. "I've never seen them like this," she said, her voice trembling. "Some of the things they wrote about you and Lauren, I just don't understand why they're so angry." My parents demanded my sisters and brothers-in-law come over the next day, without kids, for what Mom called a serious discussion about ground rules. According to Dad, it was a tense 2 hours with a lot of deflection and blame shifting. This resulted in a half-hearted apology sent through my mom's phone. We all got carried away. Sorry things got out of hand. Lauren's death glare kept me from saying what I really thought. I just said thanks and left it at that. "That's it?" Lauren asked afterward, arms crossed tightly. "They tried to humiliate us, blame us for their bad parenting, and all you say is thanks?" What else could I say with my mom standing there looking so hopeful? I replied. It's easier this way. Thinking things were settled, I unblocked them that night. Big mistake. One brother-in-law immediately texted demanding I pay for their ruined phones. You caused this. 2 iPhones. $2,200. Venmo me by Friday. I replied, never. Screenshot the message. Sent it to my parents with a note saying we were going no contact and not to invite us to anything if they'd be there. Then blocked them all again. All hell broke loose. Again. Dad called them and absolutely tore into them. He later told me he'd finally had enough of their entitlement. I told them they were acting like spoiled teenagers. He recounted, sounding energized in a way I hadn't heard in years. I said if they couldn't act like adults, they could forget about using any of our stuff. He banned the grandkids from their house indefinitely, which killed Mom's regular babysitting arrangement. And he banned my sisters from using the mountain vacation house. Now here's the thing. That vacation house? My wife and I actually own it. Not my parents. And this revelation shocked my sisters, since they'd been treating that cabin like their personal resort, hosting friends there for weekend getaways whenever they pleased. I never wanted them to know we owned it. We'd bought it for my parents, who always dreamed of a mountain retreat. It was meant to be a private gift so they could enjoy retirement without financial strain. I kept my ownership quiet specifically to avoid exactly this kind of drama. I shouldn't have mentioned the cabin, Dad admitted later, sounding a bit regretful. But they were being so entitled about everything. Georgina actually said, well, we'll just use the mountain house instead of coming here. That's when I lost it. Second update. Another month later. It had been less than a month of no contact and honestly, it was amazing how much more peaceful our lives had become. I hadn't realized how much low-level toxicity they created constantly. The random texts criticizing our life choices. The snide remarks at family gatherings. The constant one-upmanship. Lauren pointed out that I'd been checking my phone less anxiously and actually sleeping better. You don't tense up every time your phone buzzes now, she observed over breakfast one morning, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. I've noticed you're more relaxed. Personally, I didn't mind them using the vacation property. We bought it for my parents and they controlled who used it, though Lauren and I covered all operating costs and taxes. My parents had always dreamed of a place in the mountains but could never afford it. When Lauren and I found ourselves in a position to help, we jumped at the chance. It's not about the money, I'd explained to Lauren when we first discussed the purchase. It's about giving them something they've always wanted but denied themselves while raising us. One positive from this whole blow-up was knowing what to do with the property when my parents get older. We'd sell it rather than trying to manage it for the whole family. I'd previously worried about how to handle it long-term, especially with my sister's expectations. Dad changed the lock code so only he, Mom, Lauren, and I had access. Had to be done, he said matter-of-factly. They kept showing up unannounced, leaving messes, not restocking what they used. Mom started visiting each sister's home separately to spend time with the grandkids. The kids are actually better behaved when they're not competing for attention, she told me, sounding relieved. And I can actually enjoy them this way. My parents said they didn't plan on having my sister's families back to their house anytime soon and were enjoying the quiet. Your father actually sat and read a book on the patio yesterday, Mom shared, sounding amazed. First time in years he's done that. I suspect my parents were already tired of the old dynamic and used this pool incident as a catalyst to restructure their relationships. They seemed lighter somehow, less burdened. Dad was even talking about taking Mom on a road trip, something they hadn't done since before we were born. Third update. 2 more weeks later. I need to provide some financial context here. My parents aren't great with money. I've done their taxes for years, so I know their situation intimately. Their house was paid off with minimal debt, but they didn't save much for retirement. They get Social Security, Dad has a pension, and they have modest savings. I bought their current car as a retirement gift, their first non-leased vehicle in 20 years. We just never seemed to get ahead, Dad confessed to me once, his eyes downcast. Every time we started saving, something would come up with one of the girls or the house. My sisters believe our parents are wealthy and will leave them everything, since I don't need more money. So they've never bothered saving either. This misconception stems from my parents' tendency to finance things they couldn't afford, like new cars every few years, rather than admitting they were struggling. And then the real bombshell dropped. It turns out my oldest sister Georgina and her husband Pedro, with their 3 kids, had been living wildly beyond their means. Maxed out credit cards, behind on car payments, one vehicle about to be repossessed. Pedro had bragged about making good money, but it was actually half what he'd claimed. They lived in a McMansion with a swimming pool, belonged to a country club they couldn't afford, constantly posted vacation photos on social media. But here's the real kicker. Georgina confessed to Mom that she needed a loan because, for the past 3 years, instead of just staying at our vacation house, she'd been renting it out and pocketing the money. Over $2,000 per weekend, $4,000 per week, using our property, without permission, for profit. Now that she was cut off, she'd had to cancel bookings and was facing financial ruin. She was listing it on multiple rental sites. Mom told me, sounding utterly defeated. Using your father's and my photos from our trips there. She showed me the accounts on her phone, crying about all the money she's losing now. My parents couldn't afford to loan them money. And my other sister Camila? She knew about the rental scheme the entire time and never said anything. I suspect she did the same thing at least once. I remembered visiting the cabin unexpectedly and finding strangers who claimed they were staying there, with my sister's family, who had gone to town. Looking back, that made so much more sense now. They had all the information about local restaurants and hiking trails, I recalled to Lauren. Camila must have had some kind of welcome packet for them. My parents warned me my sisters would come to me next. They think you're made of money, Dad said wearily. Just be prepared. Sure enough, they ambushed me outside my home on Thursday, waiting until I returned from work. I had to choose between fighting in public, letting them cause a scene, or inviting them inside. I chose the latter. We need to talk, Georgina said as I pulled into my driveway. She and Camila were standing by their cars, arms crossed defensively. Family meeting. Once inside, they fed me this story about needing the mountain house back immediately. Georgina did most of the talking, with Camila nodding supportively. The kids miss having our family gatherings there, Georgina said, her voice dripping with false sentiment. It's where we bond as a family. Then they shifted to what was clearly their real agenda. Money. They claimed I should step up and pay for their kids' college since I was a terrible brother. And that's what family does. You and Lauren have more than you need, Camila added, leaning forward intently. Meanwhile, we're struggling to give our children the opportunities they deserve. I let them finish. Then I called them out with what my parents had told me. So this isn't about family bonding, is it? I asked calmly. It's about the thousands of dollars you've been making by illegally renting out property you don't own. Things exploded. Denial. Crying. Cursing. Screaming. The works. Georgina jumped up and started pacing, alternating between attacking me and trying to justify herself. You have no idea what it's like raising kids these days, she shouted, her voice hitting a pitch that made my ears hurt. Everything costs a fortune. Travel teams, private lessons, the right schools. We're just trying to give them the best. Camila tried a different approach. Going for guilt. If you cared about your nieces and nephews at all, you'd want to help them. What kind of uncle are you? I said some harsh truths, including that their financial problems weren't my responsibility. You've been committing fraud, I told them bluntly. You could be criminally liable for the income you didn't report. Not to mention the unauthorized use of someone else's property for profit. They finally left after an hour of back and forth. Afterward, I showered and collapsed. When Lauren got home, she told me she'd had to block more new numbers because my sisters were bombarding our phones. Georgina left me a voicemail crying about how I've turned you against them, Lauren said, deleting messages. Camila texted saying we're heartless and selfish. The next day, I drove to the vacation house and padlocked the entrance gate. I'm the only one with the key. I also walked the property to make sure nothing had been damaged or removed. Everything looked okay, though there were signs of recent use. Fresh tire tracks in the gravel. A forgotten pool float on the deck. Fourth update. Another month later. My parents handed full responsibility for the vacation home over to me, saying they were done managing it after my sisters pressured them relentlessly to allow access again. This disappointed me honestly because the place was meant for them to enjoy. I'd never minded them letting my sisters use it under normal circumstances. We're tired of being in the middle, Mom explained over coffee at their house, her hands wrapped tightly around her mug. Your father's blood pressure is up and the doctor says he needs to reduce stress. Dad was more blunt. I'm too old for this drama. If they want to fight about it, they can fight with you directly. So I secured the property. Properly this time. Locked the gate with a heavy-duty chain and a premium lock. Reset all door keypads with new codes. Installed security cameras, including one with a beautiful valley view. Put up video monitoring signs. Installed a lockout for the water shutoff valve. My property manager David helped with all of it. He's a retired sheriff's deputy who lives nearby and keeps an eye on several vacation properties in the area. If anyone tries to access without authorization, I'll know immediately, he assured me, demonstrating the camera app on his phone. The cameras all feed to my phone and yours. Both brothers-in-law called my office the following week. Pedro was furious after being locked out during a planned guys' weekend. He threatened to rip that gate out of the ground, and flat out admitted they'd been renting the property to friends for income. He demanded I refund their guests' money. Absolutely not. Juan seemed less invested in the fight. Look, Juan said toward the end of our conversation, I get you're mad, but this whole thing has gotten out of hand. Camila is crying constantly, and the kids don't understand why they can't go to the mountain house anymore. That's a parenting issue for you to handle, I replied coolly. I started seriously considering selling the vacation home. Lauren and I wouldn't use it enough to justify keeping it, and family gatherings there seemed like a distant fantasy at this point. I mentioned it to my parents and they basically said, whatever you think is best. I could easily double my investment. 3 bedrooms, amazing views at the end of a private road. But I decided to wait. Selling now would be an emotional decision. Maybe we should rent it out ourselves, Lauren suggested one evening as we reviewed property photos. At least that way it would pay for itself, and your parents could still use it whenever they want. My sisters and I weren't speaking, and I had zero plans to initiate contact. I spent a quiet evening with my parents at a new restaurant the following week. Nobody mentioned the drama, though Mom updated us on the kids, since she'd been spending time with them at their individual homes. Dogo made the travel soccer team, she shared, showing us pictures on her phone. And Ranata won a science fair ribbon. It was nice, hearing about the kids without the usual tension. I've always liked my nieces and nephews when they're not being influenced by their parents' behavior. They're just kids after all. 5th update. Another month later. My parents told me my sisters were pressuring them to demand I open the vacation house for Thanksgiving. They wanted it to become a family tradition. Even though Lauren and I had only attended once in 7 years. They usually had around 25 people, including some of my sister's in-laws. They won't stop calling about it, Mom sighed during our weekly phone check-in. They say the kids are heartbroken about missing the tradition. Dad refused to bother me about it. Instead, he proposed they rent an Airbnb in the mountains if everyone split the cost in advance. I told them put up or shut up, he recounted with satisfaction. If they want a mountain Thanksgiving so badly, they can pay for it. Otherwise, Thanksgiving would be at their house or one of my sister's places. This caused a fight between my sisters. Camila supported the Airbnb plan, but Georgina had no money. The deadline passed, so Thanksgiving defaulted to my parents' house. But we wouldn't be attending. We're going to Lauren's parents this year, I explained to Mom. It's been planned for months. This wasn't entirely true. We'd made arrangements only after hearing about the Thanksgiving drama. But it seemed kinder than telling her we were actively avoiding the family. My parents asked me not to sell the property for now. They'd like to use it occasionally once my sisters accept the new normal. Dad mentioned wanting to spend a week there fishing in the spring. They probably hope everyone can gather there again someday, but that's not happening. I prefer to sell, but we'll keep it if my parents want to use it. Plus, it'll appreciate further. The real estate market in that area is going crazy. My agent friend Kevin told me over lunch. If you can hold on for another year or two, you might see another 20% increase in value. My sisters continued calling from new numbers, leaving messages demanding we meet, for our parents' sake, to discuss the family vacation home. They called Lauren too. Your mother is heartbroken, Georgina claimed in one voicemail. All she wants is for her family to be together for the holidays. Camila took a different approach in her messages. The kids keep asking why Uncle doesn't love them anymore. Is that what you want? To hurt innocent children? According to my parents, Georgina and Pedro were getting out of their vehicle leases and selling their jet skis and other luxury items. This was particularly hard on Georgina, who loved showing off, and on Pedro, whose entire identity was tied to his truck. The man literally had the truck brand's logo tattooed on him. Pedro's been telling everyone it's a temporary thing, while they're between investment opportunities, Dad said with a snort. But the country club membership is gone too. Your mother ran into Georgina at Costco instead of that fancy grocery store she usually shops at. I felt bad for their kids who were completely innocent in all of this, but not bad enough to bail out my sisters from problems they created themselves. 6th update. Post-Thanksgiving. Things went completely to hell. My brothers-in-law broke into my vacation home, and they were arrested. They were charged with breaking and entering, destruction of property, and communicating threats. All Class 1 misdemeanors. I refused to drop charges unless they paid for every cent of damage. The day after Thanksgiving, they used an angle grinder to cut through the driveway gate chain, damaging the gate in the process. Lauren and I had been enjoying a peaceful Thanksgiving dinner with her parents when David called. Your security cameras just picked up 2 men cutting through the gate chain, he said, his voice tense. I'm heading over now, and I've called the sheriff. They destroyed the front door's lock set trying to force their way in. When that didn't work, they got in through the utility door and broke through a locked internal door. They also broke into the barn. For what reason I still don't know. Maybe looking for tools. Maybe just out of spite. When they exited through the front door, they were met by sheriff's deputies and David. He'd received the camera alerts, watched it all happen in real time, and called the sheriff immediately. The brothers-in-law tried lying their way out, but the deputies weren't buying it. They claimed you had given them permission to use the property, David told me later. But the deputies could see the broken locks and cut chain. Plus, they'd been drinking and weren't making much sense. And when they were being arrested, they threatened to beat the hell out of me, right in front of the officers. Pedro, according to the police report, specifically said, "When I get out of here, I'm going to find that little bastard and beat him until he can't walk." Since Lauren and I were unreachable, spending the day with her parents, David and the sheriff booked them on all possible charges. My sisters freaked out, called my parents, tried calling me, still blocked. They scrambled for a lawyer to arrange bail, which is incredibly difficult to find in a rural area during a holiday weekend. Georgina had no cash and maxed out cards, so Camila would have had to bail out both husbands. When we finally checked our phones that evening, we found dozens of messages. I called David to get details and assess the damage, then called the sheriff's department to confirm I wanted to press charges. Yes, I absolutely want to pursue this, I told the deputy on duty. They've been warned repeatedly to stay away from the property. When I finally called my parents on Saturday afternoon, they were distraught. Mom answered the phone in tears. "Why is this happening to our family?" she wept. "How did we get here?" My sisters had pressured them to convince me to drop charges. I flatly refused. I told them I wouldn't even consider it until I'd consulted an attorney and been fully reimbursed for every repair. Mom was crying by the end of our call, which made me feel terrible. "I know you're upset, Mom," I tried explaining. "But this has gone beyond family disagreements. They committed actual crimes." "Their family," she repeated, as if that excused everything. "We need to work this out between ourselves." Dad got on the phone then. "Your mother's upset, but I understand where you're coming from," he said quietly. "This whole thing is out of control." I hadn't visited the property yet. Seeing the damage in person would just infuriate me more. I contacted attorney friends for referrals to pursue restraining orders and potentially sue my sisters for the rental income they'd collected. Lauren was completely done with all of it. She told me it was my decision how to handle things, but she believed they needed a harsh lesson. "We've tried being reasonable," she pointed out as we discussed our options. "We've tried ignoring them. Nothing works because they feel entitled to what's ours." "You're right," I agreed, exhausted by the whole situation. Enough is enough. 7th update. 5 days later. Thursday afternoon, I received a courier-delivered envelope at my office. Inside was a signed letter from both brothers-in-law and a $5,000 cashier's check. The letter contained what seemed like a sincere apology. They acknowledged their wrongdoing, offered to pay for all damages, promised to stay away from the vacation home unless specifically invited, and asked me to help get the charges dropped because they could lose their jobs. We acted impulsively and irresponsibly, the letter stated. Our behavior was inexcusable and we deeply regret the damage we caused, both to your property and to our family relationships. We understand if you cannot forgive us, but we hope you will accept this payment for repairs and consider helping us avoid the severe professional consequences we now face. This complete 180 was shocking. I'd already scheduled an appointment with an attorney about suing them and getting restraining orders. I called and got an earlier meeting, where he recommended we pursue a settlement and mutual release agreement with all four of them instead of a full lawsuit. He started drafting it immediately. This approach will give you legally binding protection while avoiding a drawn-out court battle, the attorney, Robert, explained. The agreement will include no-contact provisions, financial restitution, and consequences for any violations. My property manager estimated repairs would cost around $4,000, mostly for the front door. They really did a number on that custom door, David reported. But the gate can be repaired rather than replaced, which saves some money. Robert contacted both brothers-in-law, who agreed to the settlement. One admitted they could afford either damages or a lawyer, not both, and that their primary concern was getting the charges dropped. One was quite forthcoming, Robert told me. He said Pedro was the instigator. They both knew it was wrong. He also mentioned your sisters have been relentless about getting back what's theirs, as they see it. Robert believed the prosecutor would likely dismiss charges, since they were paying for damages and had no prior record. However, I might need to appear in person to request dismissal. It wasn't perfect, but it should resolve the legal and financial aspects of this nightmare. I doubted I'd ever have a civil relationship with any of them again. And honestly, that was fine. What I wanted most was closure, so I could move on and never have to deal with this again. Lauren felt the same way. I just want our peaceful life back, she said as we discussed the settlement. No more emergency calls. No more anxiety every time the phone rings. Me too, I agreed. This needs to end. Final update. 5 days later. Tuesday, I reviewed the settlement agreement with Robert, made minor changes, and he sent it to my sisters and brothers-in-law. It included them paying my legal fees, about $3,000, which they immediately tried to negotiate away. They argued legal fees weren't part of the property damage. Robert shut that down fast. He explained this wasn't a negotiation. It was their only alternative to criminal prosecution and civil litigation. He told them to accept it as written or face lawsuits for the rental income, property damage, emotional distress, lost income from dealing with this mess, plus attorney fees. He also warned I'd push the DA to prosecute every single charge. They signed. Reportedly, the meeting was tense. At one point, one told both my sisters to shut the hell up or he'd make his own deal and leave them to fend for themselves. They provided another $2,500 cashier's check, claiming that was all they had left. One was surprisingly the voice of reason, Robert recounted. When your sister started protesting about the no-contact provision, he finally lost patience. He told them they were lucky you weren't pressing for jail time. Then I visited the vacation house to see the damage in person and meet with the DA's office. The senseless destruction nearly broke me. I almost abandoned the settlement right then and there just to ruin their lives. The beautiful custom front door my parents had loved so much was splintered around the lock. The gate had deep gouges from the angle grinder. Inside, they'd left empty beer bottles and dirty boot prints tracked across the floors. After venting to a friend for an hour, I managed to calm down enough to continue. They're not worth throwing away your own peace of mind, my friend reminded me. Get this settled and move on. The assistant DA agreed to drop all charges except trespassing, reduced to a Class 2 misdemeanor, since I wasn't pursuing prosecution and they'd paid for damages. The brothers-in-law had to plead guilty and pay whatever fine the judge set. I was told if they fight this charge or cause any more trouble in that county, things would go very badly for them. The judge here doesn't look kindly on property damage, the ADA informed me. If they step one toe out of line, we'll revisit the original charges. The settlement included a no-contact clause. If any of us end up in the same place, whoever arrived last has to leave immediately. They got to keep whatever they made from renting the vacation house. That was my concession. Unless I face tax consequences, which would become their responsibility. If the IRS comes knocking because of rental income reported on my property, they'll have to cover any penalties or additional taxes. I specified that to Robert, who added the provision, I told Lauren. She nodded. Fair enough. We signed that day. This is likely my final update on this entire mess. The family dynamics are permanently altered. But I had to do what was best for my wife and me. This agreement basically formalizes the no-contact arrangement we've had for months. It's not what my parents wanted, but I'm satisfied with it. Your father and I still hope someday. My mother began during our last phone call. I know, Mom, I interrupted gently. But right now this is the best solution for everyone. As Lauren and I signed the final documents in Robert's office, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. Physically, like I could breathe deeper. Ready to put this behind us? She asked, squeezing my hand. More than ready, I replied, signing the last page. Let's go home. Looking back on this whole saga, I can't help but reflect on how quickly family relationships can unravel when entitlement, greed, and poor communication collide. The mountain house that was meant to be a peaceful retreat for my parents became the epicenter of a family civil war. 3 months ago, I never would have imagined my brothers-in-law would be facing criminal charges, or that I'd need a legal agreement just to keep my own sisters away from me. The drive home from Robert's office was quiet. Lauren and I were both lost in our thoughts. The rain that had been threatening all day finally began to fall, droplets streaming down the windshield like tears. Do you think we'll ever reconcile with them? Lauren asked, breaking the silence. I considered this for a long moment. Maybe someday, but not until they truly understand what they did wrong. And honestly, I'm not sure they're capable of that level of self-reflection. She nodded, reaching over to take my hand. I'm proud of you, you know. You stood your ground when it would have been so much easier to cave. That evening, as we sat on our back porch watching the sunset, my phone buzzed. A text from Dad. Fishing trip in April? Just us men. Could use some quiet time on that beautiful lake. I smiled and replied, absolutely. I'll mark my calendar. Perhaps this wasn't the ending I'd expected when we bought that mountain retreat. But maybe it was the one we needed. The property that had become a source of so much pain and contention would now serve its original purpose, providing peace and relaxation for those who truly appreciated it. My parents started making their own plans for the future, less weighed down by my sister's constant demands. Mom was thinking about joining a book club. Dad was talking about volunteering at the local fishing club to teach kids. They were rediscovering themselves in retirement, and honestly, I never anticipated that. But I was grateful to witness it. As for my nieces and nephews, I hope someday they'll understand. Perhaps when they're older, we can build relationships independent of their parents. Children shouldn't have to pay for their parents' mistakes. For now, though, Lauren and I are focusing on our own lives. We've decided to take that European vacation we've been postponing for years. Life is too short to waste on drama and toxicity. Sometimes the family you choose is more important than the one you're born into. And that mountain house? It will remain a sanctuary, not a battleground. Whether we eventually sell it or keep it, one thing is certain. It will never again be used by people who don't respect or appreciate it. Hey, Lauren said, interrupting my thoughts with a warm smile. What do you think about inviting your parents to join us in Italy next fall? I think they'd love Tuscany. I looked at my wife, amazed at her generous spirit, even after everything we'd been through. That's a brilliant idea. Dad would go crazy for the wine tours. As the last light faded from the sky, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. This chapter was closing, and a new one was beginning. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. Boundaries intact. With the knowledge that sometimes the hardest decisions are the most necessary ones. So let me ask you this. Have you ever had to cut off family to protect your own peace? Would you have handled this differently? Or do you think I let them off too easy? I genuinely want to know. Drop your thoughts in the comments.